Hello, good morning, good morning. How is everyone? Let me know how you're doing. Welcome to this week's Learn with Lorna, episode 194, where we're looking at the Morris Pottinger collection. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres across the Highlands of Scotland, one in Inverness, one in Wick, one in Fort William, and one in Portree. If you've been watching for the last 193 episodes, you'll be more than used to this introduction, so you can say it along with me. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there is no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we're really grateful for that. And I know many of you have given us donations through our website or through our donation boxes, and it's really appreciated. And also, a lot of people have been in touch following Learn with Lorna's with donations of collections of material. So if you're in a position to do that, where you think you have something that might add to the story of the Highlands for future generations, then please do get in touch with us. So this week we are looking at one exactly such collection, a collection held at Nucleus, the Nuclear and Caithness Archives. You'll know if you've been watching for a while that sometimes I do subjects that cross all 4 of our archive centres, and sometimes I do ones that are particular to one archive. So that's what I'm doing today, a collection held within the Caithness Archive collections, the collections of Morris Pottinger. So thank you so much to the team at Nucleus who have put together some notes for me about this collection, an overview of it, some great examples, and then I have kind of amalgamated all of that into today's session. So this is collection P671 at Nucleus, so it's a deposited collection. It comprises 6 boxes of material written by or gathered by Morris Pottinger, including maps, transcripts, articles, research notes, and all sorts of other material. So who's Morris Pottinger? What were his research interests? What can we learn about the history of Caithness and the wider Highlands through this collection? Morris Pottinger was born on the 1st of August 1929 at Whitehall, Isle of Stronsay. He was the oldest of the children born to Thomas Band Pottinger and Annie Piper Tate. Between 2006 and 2011, aged in his late 70s and early 80s, Morris Pottinger wrote a series of articles for the John O'Groat Journal entitled Rain on My Window. And these articles are now part of the collection held at Nucleus. And we can look at these to find out a bit more about his early years in Stronsay and then his move to the mainland. The challenge for me with this collection has been deciding what to pick, because there's just so many brilliant stories in it. And so you can expect this particular episode to include far more of Morris Pottinger's words than of mine. So I'm going to share the entire first article from Rain on My Window. It's a long reading, but I think that it just sets the scene perfectly. It sums up something about what Morris Pottinger thought about, wrote about, communicated, cared about, and it might also encourage some of you, it might inspire some of you to do something similar. Okay, so episode 1 of Rain on My Window, or article 1 of the series Rain on My Window. Number 1, in the beginning. As I look back at the last century and realise I was in it, I think of all I have seen and all that has gone away. Distance of time dims memory somewhat, but not entirely. My early days with 3 younger brothers and 3 younger sisters were spent in Whitehall Farm in Stronsay, a 450-acre rented farm. The island had 1,000 people then. Whitehall village was very busy herring fishing station in the summer and a quiet backwater in winter, save for farming and island life and the steamer on its regular calls from Kirkwall, the Earl of Thorfinn, the smaller Earl Sigurd. Coal-burning steamships with slow-moving reciprocating steam engines we loved to watch through the open door down into the engine room, thumping their way across the seas, and sometimes up and down the seas more than across. These 2 ships were named after 2 notable old Viking Earls of Orkney. But this is not a treatise on the island, that's been done before. This is rather me putting down my remaining memories of an earlier life. I have had the privilege of living through a revolution of farming, a revolution of time and so-called progress that took us from the long-established walking pace horse and cart and strong backs farming through to the age of the superfast agriculture in the 21st century. The tears are not of sorrow for forgotten days, not entirely. They are for many good memories, for the good people I met along the way. They are kindnesses to a small boy who constantly asked why to the point of distraction among my elders, but who nevertheless did their best to assuage his curiosity. And thankfully that curiosity is still there. Tears, perhaps, for the recollections in the sunset sky, fading but leaving an afterglow of memories, sweet and soft and sometimes sad. I believe, rightly or wrongly, that Lewis Carroll, pseudonym of Charles Ludwig Dodson, wrote Alice in Wonderland for his grandchildren, and I take that as an excellent precedent. So with some trepidation, I will try and put down something of my yesterdays for my own grandchildren, and in the hope that other younger, or indeed older, people may get a flavour of the days gone by. One of my recent rather delightful events was to have two city kids from Yorkshire visit Isold, which is the farm that he lived on. And he describes how he set them out with a bucket to dig in his wife's garden, to dig their potatoes, and the joy that that had brought to them, and how they wrote him thank you letters to say just being in and among the land and digging in the soil had brought them so much pleasure. And this was another thing that had prompted him to write about his memories. This is but an introduction to a long look back to childhood days which everyone says were better, sunnier, happier. Perhaps so, perhaps no, I can't judge. It's said that time lends enchantment to memory. What I do know is that those far-off days involved long hours of hard work with little time off for anything, very few holidays. Yet in today's frantic pace we seem to be no better in sorting out the problems of the world. So I hope to write a little and share with the John O'Groat readers a series of vignettes of a small boy born into farming at Whitehall, who then at the age of 14 in May 1944 moved to Greenland Mains in Caithness. To round off my own pathway, I at 12 had gone to Inverness to the Royal Academy, partly because the war was on and Kirkwall, where I would normally have gone, was at high risk from German bombing. Scapa Flow Naval Base was a constant target, with the Royal Oak torpedoed and sunk early in the war in October 1939 by a U-boat. The old battleship Iron Duke was bombed and settled on the bottom. Inverness was fine, but there were reminders of the war, with armed forces training and forces establishments such as Cameron Barracks and blue-clad walking wounded service personnel from the original Rakemore Hospital, a series of wooden buildings. The hillsides around Inverness were denuded of trees for timber by Newfoundlanders, good lumberjacks and rush diamonds too. I got my hires at 15, did an extra year to get extra hires, was accepted for medicine at Edinburgh, went grudgingly as I wanted to stay on the farm. I did most of the first year and then came back to Caithness at 17, no doubt to the chagrin of my mother and father. I stayed there when they went to Stempster Mains in May 1949, stayed on when they returned there in May 1951, bought Lower Dunray in November 1953 from Pat Ogg. I married my sweetheart Nettie Dunnett from Keith on the heads of the new farm, sold Lower Dunray to the UK Atomic Authority at the point of a gun in November 1955, took over neighbouring Isold farm that same month. Isold, keep saying Isold. They bought this farm in 1955, moved there in 1956, and I am still there at the time of writing as the tenant of the authority of the conjoined farms. Nettie and I had 3 children, Tom, Stephen and Janet, and 9 grandchildren. Time moved on. I lost Nettie in April 1995. In 2004, I married Sharon Gunnison from Indianapolis, USA, and she now shares my life at Isold, far from her own hometown. Life has not been dull. I've forgotten a great deal, but there is much still left in my treasure chest. If I can share some memories with you before it's too late, then I shall be content. So as I say, a long reading, but it really sets the scene of him, his interests, why he gathered the material he did, and why he thought it was important to share it. And like I say, I thought it was a nice one to share in case it prompts any of you to go, I could probably sit and spend some time doing that. And subsequent articles do exactly what he hoped in the end there. If I can share some memories of you of my life before it's too late, then I'll be content. And the subsequent articles from this series do exactly that. So for instance, number 5, Thrashing Day in the Morning. He recalls the way in which the family moved from Stronsay to Caithness. They flew from farm to farm with Captain Fresson in a de Havilland 7-seater biplane from a field at Whitehall direct to Greenland Mains, and that during the war, which meant that they had to fly a particular route because they weren't allowed to fly over Scapa Flow. And in that article, he refers to 50 years' worth of pocket diaries that had been kept by his great uncle William Tate, who was in Orkney. And these were transcribed, and these also now form part of the Morris Pottinger collection, covering the years about 1880 to 1941. They also provide a really fascinating insight into farming life across the 19th and 20th centuries. And as that reading said, a period of enormous change in farming practices, some that came about through development of technology, some that came about through necessity because of global situations, and we'll come back to that. But Morris Pottinger's article highlights this as he compares William Tate's experiences of farming in the late 1880s to his own experiences. But he compares the fact that whatever age you live in, and I'm sure if there are any farmers watching this, they will agree that there is a relentless demand of farming. No matter what technology is on your side and how much easier that makes aspects of it, it is a constant, full-time, passion-driven job a lot of the time. And so he talks about the process of thrashing, the separating of the grain from the plants. The article describes forking the sheaves into the mill, and he says the smell of oil and paraffin dust was everywhere, emotive, evocative. And he was a little boy at this time. So he says, starting the engine, which had massive iron driving wheels with one wide pulley always next to the wall for safety. This particular article is really descriptive, very expressive. It describes things, as I said there, like the smell of the oil, the smell of the paraffin dust. Describes the machinery as whispering, singing and thumping. Talks about the smells, the noises, the roles that he and the other children had on those very busy, long, community days. And you might think it's a very nostalgic article, and in some way it is a nostalgic article. You might think it's very rose-tinted, but actually he finishes that particular article by saying, once the huge machinery got up and running for thrashing the grain, he says, we boys then had to go into the farmhouse. Too many moving and dangerous parts and belts for small boys to stay around. Today, boys would not be allowed near the thrashing mill by health and safety regulations. In fact, we wouldn't be able to run a thrashing mill at all, as we used to, and quite right too. Other articles look at different aspects of the changing agricultural world, and you can see why he was keen to get out of doing medicine at Edinburgh University and come back and focus on the farm, which was obviously his passion. And the other articles look at different aspects. So for instance, he talks about the arrival of a tractor on his childhood farm, and that was prompted by his father in 1938 predicting that the Second World War was going to start and that men would be called away and that it would be impossible to do the farm labour without something. And it was also the advent of war that prompted the family to get their radio. And this is the extract where he talks about the new radio coming. There was in the house a huge old cabinet radio that hardly ever worked, other than squeaks and static and hiccups and silence. Bought for his father on one of the visits by our father's brother, our Uncle John, a surgeon in New Zealand. It needed an out-of-doors aerial of immense length and batteries of various kinds. We never really used it at all, and Stronsay was a long way from any transmitter, and nor was our father radio inclined. But again, in 1938, father said a war was coming, and he'd better get a proper radio, although we called it a wireless. It was a pie, lots of dials and knobs, a dry battery and a wet one called an accumulator. They were rechargeable, and it was one on and one off to be recharged at Swanee's shop in the village. It worked magically well, and it came to Greenland Mains with us, and it lasted us a long time. Electricity was not unknown on the island, and some handy people had their own, worked by a small windmill and charging a bank of wet batteries. I don't know what power it produced. It had to be small in output, but it was another miracle. Lights only. We had none. The house lighting was paraffin lamps, trimmed and cleaned and filled in the lamp hole. A totally dark cupboard room with no windows, which was very smelly. Their light must have been sufficient then, but today nobody would read or could read with them. There were some better lamps, double wicks, large chimney glass, ornate collector's pieces today if you could find one. Some were suspended centrally from the ceiling in the better rooms. Dangerous appliances when you think on it, and no doubt at all some were upset and were a fire risk. In the sitting room we had an Aladdin lamp on a tall stand, very good, sweet, soft light, but it had an incandescent mantle, and at times it silently went up in smoky flames if it was turned up too high. Again, really dangerous, although we never had a real catastrophe, just a very sooty room. You really get the sense of the poetry in the writing, I think. Now, his articles, as I say, recall loads of different aspects of farming life, things like stooking the sheaves, the stackyard, the laying down of crops. There's an article entitled The Dairy, which, unsurprisingly, given the title, talks about the girls milking the cows, by hand of course, him as a child drinking the warm milk straight out of the pail as the cows had been milked, the process of separating the milk and the cream and then letting the cream go sour before churning it into butter. He says none of today's fresh everything. And he also added that there was no food standards, no slimming or any other modern nonsense like that. The other product of the dairy, of course, was cheese, and the article finishes with a description of the ready-made squeaky-to-cut cheese. Article 19 of this series recalls the laying down of the neeps. He says this was the most arduous and time-consuming of tasks, because to lay out the turnip crop involved getting the field as level as possible, and so the field had to be ploughed and harrowed and rolled again and again and again. And he describes really clearly the back-breaking work of trying to remove the deep weeds that were in the neep fields. Fertiliser was then spread on before the field was ploughed again and the seeds sown. And then a few days later they would be ready to be thinned or singled. And dozens of men, women and children would be given the role of separating the turnips out, so they'd plant more than they needed and then separate them out to leave one every 9 inches or so. And he says this was about 6 weeks of work. If anyone still works in farming or sows neeps, then you can let me know the comparison. He says the object was to leave one small single turnip plant every 9 inches or so, lying away from the hoer to better bulb up in the autumn. We had to lay the plants flat, and I do not think it made a whit of difference, although a long established tradition, and it did look good and regular in the field. The ridge was also cleaned of small weeds as the work proceeded. It was no easy task, but long practice made perfect. There would be a long line of singlers following each other in echelon, room for extra workers such as the women on the farm and any casual workers one could get. Small boys and girls too, but we were given a patch of our own because we just couldn't keep up. We often just did the ends. I saw 20 at a time in a line. Singling went on through the evenings as well, workers doing other jobs but coming in to do evening work and get a bit of pocket money. 6 weeks' worth. Thinning or singling the neeps was full of incident. Who would have thought that just a line of men would have had so many adventures in the middle of a neep field? Days of wearing oilskins, days of burning sunshine, days of gale force winds, we had them all. Today we forget the measurements of our fathers. An acre, now hectare, was 270 chains of neeps at 28-inch centre drills. A fair day's work was 45 chains a man. At Greenland Mains, with free and clear ground, we did 90 chains, really walking on. In weedy neeps, I couldn't even care to hazard a guess, but it would be mighty slow work. At times the young neeps got ahead of the men, making thinning a laborious and back-breaking job. And at times, when some farmer got behind with his thinning, people other than the farm men would go in their own time in the evenings to help push things on, a very welcome and sometimes a merciful help. One aspect of singling, though, not to be forgotten. Although the work was hard and the weather could be unhelpful, the constant chatter and banter and back-chat and roll of local news and humour was as good as a concert. You can't talk to a tractor. I was interested in Article 87, which is on kelp making, because it ties into something else I've been looking at recently. So I'll probably do a Learn with Lorna on kelp at some point. But this is how he describes the kelp industry, particularly in Stronsay and in those islands on the way to Orkney. Kelp making was one of our pre-war tasks in Stronsay, although it had a very long history going back to 1719, when James Fay of Whitehall began the industry in Stronsay. It provided iodine, potash and soda used in glass and soap manufacture, and was at times in short supply due to various American and French wars. Kelp was produced by burning dried seaweed in stone-lined pits above the beach. Gathered at low tide or thrown up by storms, the seaweed was first spread and dried on low open stone dikes to be ready for the kilns. The burning was a slow, smoky process, taking about 2 days for a full kiln, with constant replenishing. The work would go on all summer as other work allowed, fitting in with farm work and the herring fishing season. Even if the men were down in the village carting herring or employed in other work, the women would be gathering the seaweed for kelp burning as available, carrying it laboriously up above the beach. We looked out from Whitehall down to the Ness, part of the farm anyway, and we saw the spirals of heavy, acrid, grey-white smoke drifting skywards. I remember going down with our father, who was the oversman for the kelp workers. He weighed the finished product, checked that no stones were included, kept order where needed, determined if someone had strayed onto someone else's stint, marked by this rock or that rock. I don't know if the stints were changed or not. I don't think it was a free-for-all, but each would have his own drying dikes and his own kiln pit. Certainly when the seaweed was in, it had to be snatched up before the next high tide took it out again. Wet, heavy material to work with, and cold too. The crusted, burnt kelp ash was broken up, raked over and then carted to store to be ready for shipping at the end of the season. Normally that would be in late in August. The harvest and the wetter weather would then put a stop to the kelp work as the men all returned to their own harvests. The shallow seas around the North Isles were excellent sources of seaweed, washing up on the shores after storms on good holding beaches. At its peak, Orkney was exporting 3,000 tonnes of kelp a year during the boom years from 1780 to 1830. The kelp was used in the making of glass dyes and soaps in the northeast of England, particularly in Newcastle, and it brought much money to landowners, some of which was invested in farm improvements. The Napoleonic Wars gave impetus to kelp when imports from the Baltic were suspended and British industry had to replace it. In Caithness there was kelp burning along the shores from Castle Hill to Merkel Point, but the Orkneys had so many good beaches. Kelp making is an emotive subject going back many years. Tales of landlords making big money and their tenants being impoverished by having to burn the seaweed that they had previously used to fertilise their fields, severely reducing their own grain yields. Stronsay had well-documented kelp wars, 2 at least, when the tenants rebelled at having their seaweed fertiliser burnt and their crops ruined, all to line the pocket of a landlord. But, like so many other cottage industries that once sustained the countryside, the kelp industry is now long gone. As well as writing the Rain on My Window articles, Morris Pottinger also wrote the Crofter's Barn series and also published several books, including Parish Life in the Pentland Firth. And among his research notes, is an article that he wrote in 2012 detailing his own land acquisitions and how the different farms that he acquired and what happened. This is the story of how he bought Lower Dunray. I met Nettie Burnett in I'll try that whole thing again. I met Nettie Dunnett in Barrack Hall with Keith's concert party on the last Friday of April 1951. In 1953 I was looking for a farm for us and went to see Waterloo Farm outside Wick. On coming home, my father asked me what I thought of it, and I said I wouldn't buy it, and he said that was a good answer because he would not have let me. The farm was not to his liking either. I was pleased that he had let me go on my own and make up my own mind without him, and that I had come up with the right answer. Next was early November 1953, when father came home from the mart to Greenland Mains and said that Lower Dunray might be coming on the market. I was going to Hereford to a Hereford bull sale and said if he saw the owner, Peter Ogg, to ask him. On my return on Saturday, he told me it was for sale, he had spoken to Peter Ogg, and he had been west with my brother David to see it and to call on Mrs. MacDonald at Isolde next door, who was a good friend. On Monday, my brother David, who had been there with our father to see Lower Dunray, drove me to see the farm by arrangement with Peter Ogg. Coming over Buldo, the farm lay before us. David pointed out the land. My eye ran further to Isolde, and I thought at that never to be forgotten moment that it would make a good addition to Lower Dunray if things panned out. Mrs. MacDonald had no one to follow her. And what followed was some haggling, some looking for higher prices, some negotiating, and eventually the farm was bought for £22,000. He then writes, I went straight round the corner into Marketplace, where I met Nettie off her bus, told her we were in business. We went to Cormac's Jewellers and bought an engagement ring and a wedding ring, went to see the Baptist minister in Keith in the evening, and were married on the 23rd of November 1953. I just love that description of as soon as I can get the house sorted out, then I can come back and tell you, and then we can get married. In 1955, only a couple of years later, Morris and Nettie sold Lower Dunray Farm to the UK Atomic Energy Authority. Now, you may remember in that first reading that he said that it was at the point of a gun. So it was, I think in something else I had read, that if he hadn't agreed to the purchase, there was a compulsory purchase order in place. But what came out of that was that they actually ended up moving to that neighbouring farm, Isolde, in 1956, where he would remain for the next 50 plus years, farming in the shadow of Dunray and bringing innovation and opinions to the farming community and to the NFU. But it wasn't all work, and the collection reveals that he and Nettie travelled visiting countries as diverse as New Zealand, Barbados and Kenya before Nettie's death in 1995. But a few years later, Morris Pottinger was again to find happiness by marrying Sharon Gunnison, an American who had been visiting Caithness and attending the Halkirk Games. And I think possibly Sharon is watching today. Morris Pottinger finally retired from the farm in 2009 at the age of 80, but he didn't retire from his love of local history and genealogy, continuing to collect information, write information, and deposit it with the archive. He passed away in 2023, and his obituary stated that as well as his passion for farming, Caithness, travel and writing, he was particularly proud of his family. He left behind a brilliant legacy of documents and articles which remain at Nucleus for all of us to read and to learn from. In one article for the Crofters Barn series, Morris said, "It would be nice if I could record some of the fascinating days gone by of Crofters, of their hard struggle to make a living on too small a piece of too thin ground. It would be nice if I could record some of the fascinating days gone by of Crofters, of their hard struggle to make a living on too small a piece of thin ground." And he did just that, not just through the articles, but also through a series of recordings as part of the wonderful Wick Voices project. So if you want to hear Morris Pottinger's words in his own voice, rather than me sharing them, I'll share a link at the end of this episode so that you can go onto Wick Voices and listen to recordings of him talking. But until you do that, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for listening to this episode. Sharon, I'm absolutely delighted to see that you're here, and I hope that that did justice to the extraordinary collection that your husband left with us. If you're able to do the same thing, please consider doing it. If you're able to write down your memories, do it in sections, do it in themes, do it in aspects of your life, whatever it might be, but get them down. And if you are able to, give them into an archive, a local archive for future generations. It really matters that we can hear those words and we can learn from them and we can experience vicariously something that most of us haven't actually lived through. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope you can join me next week, where I'll be looking at the voices of children in our collections. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there is no payment or subscription required to take part in this series of events. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really appreciate that. And thank you for all your lovely comments. I can't tell you what a difference they make to see the comments coming in. I feel like I'm not on my own talking. Thank you.